Ego Dissolution is the debut full-length album from Walpole, Massachusetts-based death metal band Ancient Death. And we could call them just a death metal band, but I think once you've encountered any of their music, you'll realize there are heavy influences from early progressive death metal out of Florida, as well as some psychedelic death metal. You could generally call it atmospheric death metal because the atmosphere is just as important as the movement, although you'll find strong influences from atheist and Finnish death metal, as well as, like Cynic and certainly Morbid Angel. The thing to know about this band was that it formed in 2019 by way of folks who'd been previously involved in the band Garroted. The thing about that group is that they were kind of slow going. They put out a demo and an EP, I believe, in a late 80s style of progressive death metal, something that was just old school death metal in trade and had some thrash metal influences. It was a very promising band that brought in a lot of interesting Finnish death metal influences, and they were kind of onto something. But at some point, that band didn't work out, and most of the members of Garroted went on and formed Ancient Death with some different members. The lineup of the band essentially changed over the first couple of years of putting together their sound, but by 2022, when it was time to start recording more official releases, they added a different drummer. If you go back and listen to their first single, Labyrinths of Self-Reflection, you will get a pretty good idea of what this band is all about, although I would say their earlier stuff focused a little bit more on some of those atmospheric Finnish death metal influences. It did feel like it was a fresh step away from Garroted as they've moved on over time. I think if you're a fan of Horrendous and the way they evolved from 2015 until now, or if you're a fan of anything from The Chasm to a modern band like Cavern Womb, you'll understand where this band is coming from. I'll try to capture both sides of Ancient Death in a clip here. I don't know if I will, but there is definitely a pure death metal attack to some of this, and then there is a floaty off into outer space side of the band, which I think most people will compare to Blood Incantation, so check that out. Personally, when I think of Blood Incantation, I think of a very different style of rhythm, a different approach to the heavier side of death metal, and probably encroaching into the 90s a little bit deeper. In terms of what Ancient Death does here on Ego Dissolution, you'll find a lot more of this is very much locked into what I would consider unquestionable presence-inspired work. I'm not saying that just because the guitarist is now a touring member with Atheist, but because you really will feel that elasticity of rhythm and the progressive death metal influences up front, especially the early 90s style. That isn't to say that there aren't like Bolt Thrower or Morphus type songs on this record, or at least vignettes or moments. Those riffs do show up as they kind of work through their groove, but this record is not necessarily meant to sit in one place, and as we parse through it and the full effect of it unravels, it's definitely a progressive metal record. The atmosphere is a big part of it, but the way that they weave in and out, this is a classic form of progressive death metal that's done quite well. Throughout most of this record, from my point of view, they're feeling through the dark. They're making judgments and making rhythmic decisions, and they're writing these songs with a strong taste for old school death metal, but they're not necessarily working with pure conviction. They're exploring. There's a sense of exploration in this record and not so much narration, and so we're getting, it's more of an experiential death metal record. And I think what I called it in the intro to this written review was that it's a new form of hippie death metal that we've been getting more so in the last I would say 10 years or so, and really the focus is on not only new age mystic concepts and psychedelia and personal growth, but also movements that are very much in tune with 90s death metal worship. So we do get a band that is notable from my point of view. I do think this is one of the strongest releases of this particular week in April. I think it's a very memorable package overall, between the very strong album art and the kind of organic but still professional recording of this record. It all is very polished and strong work. I think what's what's missing is kind of the riffs. And I wouldn't say that there are no riffs on this record, but there aren't rhythms here that feel like they're entirely Ancient Death's own. It feels like, again, they're exploring through these ideas. Granted, that is exactly what I had to say about the first and second Blood Incantation records. They're exploring a lot of ideas without having fully fused and made it their own. But I think this is a very strong entrant. It's a band that I'm interested in, and considering where they've been and where they've taken this sound, it's very promising. I like what they've done here. I'd like to see them take on a little bit more of their own personality beyond the lyrics. I think the lyrics are strong and very personal, but the voice, I feel like the rhythms and all of it needs to come together to where there's a knack on display and not just ideas. The ideas are impressive and it all works together, but I like to hear their own personal fusion and knack of these ideas into something that is fully their own. So for a debut, it does a great job, but I'm interested to see where they go with it beyond this point. Check it out, see what you think. It released today on April 18th, and go ahead and read my review for more of my thoughts in depth.